Hello YouTubers and fellow hams. Well, I've been playing around with a couple of antenna things over the last week, and I'm going to talk about one of them today. I'm going to revisit the PA0RDT Miniwhip. Some years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I did a video on it, bought the kit. It's available all over the place. I'll find one of them and put a link down in the video description for you. What it is it's an active antenna. Sort of an antenna. It's small. It's a little PC board with a low noise amplifier built into it, and part of the PC board is actually the pickup. This tiny little piece of the PC board picks up the RF, gets amplified and sent down the coax. It's active, so it needs power, and power is provided to it through the coax itself via a bias T. Here's a picture of my little bias T board in this Altoids tin. And you'll notice right away there's a switch and a resistor there. I'll talk about that in a moment. And I got a little choke on the incoming 12 volts DC. But the way this bias T works is, I'll see if I can find a schematic. Essentially, power comes in through the choke, so RF doesn't come in on the power line or go back up the power line, and goes up the coax. And then RF coming down the coax from the Miniwhip passes through a capacitor, which blocks the DC and allows the RF to go onto your receiver. Up at the Miniwhip, there's a similar design where you've got a capacitor to block that incoming DC and pass the RF from the amplifier to the coax. So it's an active antenna. Back when I played with it 4 or 5 years ago, I had it out on the outside of my house. I didn't really set it up quite right. There's a lot of varying opinions on how to ground it properly, and it does need a ground to work well, apparently, according to most of what I've read. But these guys can't decide on the best way to do it. So some say it has to have its own isolated ground. Some say that it doesn't. I don't know. It's the more you read about it, the more sites you visit, the more opinions you find that vary slightly from each other. So I read through a whole bunch of them and sort of arrived at a conclusion somewhere in between it all. But anyway, the reason that I wanted to revisit this is I live in an RV, and when I travel, often I'll end up having to stop overnight in a rest area, a Walmart parking lot, or an RV park. And I might want to end my day by doing a little shortwave listening. I kind of still enjoy browsing around on the shortwave bands. Well, to do that, presently I have to put up an antenna. And if you're in a rest area, the last thing you want to do is draw attention to yourself and put up some kind of an antenna outside, maybe on the RV, but then you've got to remember in the morning to take it down. I have not driven away with an antenna up. That would be bad, but I could see it happening, And so it's inconvenient. If I'm traveling, I stop at a rest area, I want to do some shortwave listening, I'm pretty much out of luck. I've got a magnetic loop, but inside the RV, well, there's an aluminum frame in this box, and it just doesn't work. And I haven't found an indoor antenna that works worth a darn inside the RV. So I thought of the Miniwhip, and I thought, I could mount that outside. It's really small, it wouldn't take up much space, and it would just basically always be there like a fixture. I'd have an always available antenna for receiving that all I'd have to do is just flip a switch on the bias T power supply, and I'm up and going. And so that's what I did. On the back of the RV, I have a PVC tube that I use occasionally for dropping a short mast into. I've got an MFJ telescoping mast where part of it broke. It's now about a 25-foot mast. It's perfect. I drop it in that PVC cup, I can pull an antenna up. It's been convenient for when I'm, visiting someplace for a few days and I just want to get an antenna up without going through the hassle of putting the big mast up. But I thought this would be a perfect spot to put the Miniwhip. It's at the top of my ladder. So I got an end cap and another little chunk of PVC, and I built the Miniwhip into it. I'll show you some pictures here. It fits in there really well. I put a stainless steel bolt through the top of the cap. I'm going to put a nut and a wing nut on there so I could actually attach a wire to it if I wanted to add some wire to the Miniwhip. But by itself, just with that little bolt and the part of the PC board, it does pick up signals and work well enough for doing, just browsing around on shortwave. It doesn't work as well as my doublet, but that's a big antenna. So I mounted that up there on the PVC, and I ran another coax run to that box at the back, and there we go. It's nice and neat and tidy. It can stay out there. I sealed up the bolt and the seams with silicone rubber, so it's it's watertight. And I ran a ground wire from it down through the PVC so that I can experiment with grounding. So let's go to the computer, and I've got some media clips that I've recorded while I was browsing around on the shortwave band, and let's take a look at how it performs on the back of the RV there. This was midday, and it was coming through pretty well, as you can see there. Nice clean signal, and I got a real good copy on the WeatherFax transmission. I did talk about or mention grounding earlier, and some people say that the whip needs to have its own isolated ground. Some people say it should be grounded to the mast it's mounted to. Some people say it works okay without a ground. I did a test with all three instances. Here's a side-by-side comparison where I had a ground rod driven into the ground, a 4-foot ground rod, and in one case the Miniwhip connected to the ground rod by itself, nothing else connected there. The other case I had the Miniwhip and the RV sharing the ground, and in the third case I didn't have any ground at all on the Miniwhip, and I actually got slightly better performance without the ground, with just the dangling wire not connected to anything. I'll watch this as I move around, and it might change as I go to different places. So here we are on the Miniwhip, and I am listening to 20 meters, and you can see signals are coming through. Here's the FT8 stuff over here. Well, it just went away. There it comes back. And it's doing pretty well. Let's listen to a couple of stations here.
Northeast quadrant, 75 nautical miles southeast quadrant, and 30 nautical miles southwest quadrant.
So you can see it's working pretty well up here. Let's go take a look at, let's see, WWV real quick. And we'll go AM. All right, a little noisy on 10 megahertz. Now, you'll remember I had a switch and a resistor in my bias T box. That resistor, and I'll have to go measure it and put the value here on the screen for you somewhere, was experimentally arrived at. If I flip that switch so that resistor is in, it drops the voltage, the bias voltage that's feeding the Miniwhip, from 13 volts to about 7 volts. And that kind of reduces the gain of it a little bit, but it also sometimes improves the signal-to-noise ratio. For example, let's look at WWV here. And using the Graticule here on GQRX, we can see our noise is at the first line here, and WWV is just about reaching this second dotted line. Right now I'm at the full 13 volts, and I will switch to the resistor side. So here is power off. And there is the resistor side. So this time it did drop the signal too. It seems to vary how it behaves, but having the ability to reduce the gain on it slightly has been helpful in some cases where it's actually reduced the background noise quite a bit. Now I'll switch it back to the full 13 volts. Okay, the signal stayed about the same. I'll put the mouse pointer right about where the signal peak is on WWV there. Alright, right about there. Now I'm going to switch to the lower voltage. And you can see the signal did not drop very much. I don't know if the noise kind of flattened out a little bit, got a little quieter. So sometimes dropping that voltage down a little bit does help. So I put that in as an option that I can switch in and out. We'll go back to the full 13 volts there. Okay, what about, well, let's see. It is 4:46 p.m., so late afternoon. We're about 3 hours to sunset. Let's see what we see at 5 megahertz. Yeah, we can still hear WWV. Just barely. It's got a little bit of noise. Now I'm going to switch down to the 7 volts. Yeah, it actually got worse this time. About the same. There are times when it helps. Let's go down to the AM broadcast band. Interestingly enough, this Miniwhip seems to be pretty sensitive down at lower frequencies, even down to VLF. So here's the AM broadcast band. I'm not seeing too many stations. I'm going to switch down to the 7 volts. And yeah, signal peaks didn't drop too much. Now that's mostly noise. Let's see if we can find some stations here. Oh wow, usually I see a bunch of them. There's one. Okay, can't leave the music up too long. YouTube will zap me for copyright.
52 degrees, man.
I love it. Turtle.
He's not here yet, man.
He's late every morning. Okay. Squirrel.
The forest has been preparing
13
just
volts.
for you. To learn about cool things to do in the forest, visit
7 volts. Not really much difference in that
Forest
case.
Service and the Ad Council.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Dale
Let's go
Brown,
down to
best-selling
VLF just for
techno-killer
grins
author.
and giggles. And what I'm really interested in is I want to see if I can hear WWVB, which will be at 60 kilohertz. I can see it there in the waterfall. That is WWVB. Now here, dropping it down to 7 volts on the bias T actually improved the signal-to-noise ratio. You could see it got more defined in the waterfall. I'll switch it back to 13 volts. See that? It seems to be picking up a little bit more noise. That's 7 volts. So there are times where dropping that voltage down actually improves things. I have a hard time down here though. Let me drop this volume down. And we'll expand the display back out here. Because Kingman has noise. See that splat of yellow? And if we go up 1 kilohertz, let's go, well, wait, that's 1 megahertz. No, I want to go into the AM broadcast band. I don't see it as much over here. I'm farther away from the power lines. You see this here? And this over here? See that sort of, that faint yellowish noise in there? Let me bring the gain up. There we go. Now we can really see it. See all that? Kind of drops off as we move up into the AM broadcast band further. Yeah, see, we don't even see it up here. I'll just expand the display out so we can really see. There we go. These noise bands here, I think, are my RV's power supply. It's a switch mode supply, and it's creating those. But you see this broad kind of garbage here around 600 kilohertz. And if I go down a little bit, you really start to see it down here. See this noise? It's kind of a general noise. That is coming from the power lines. I took the little Malahit DSP receiver and I walked over to the power pole the other night, and I verified that that's indeed where it's coming from. Let's take a look at that clip. There's a power transformer up there. And there on the side of the power pole is the ground wire. Now let's look at the display on the Malahit. You can see I'm on 600 kilohertz, bottom end of the AM band, and can't really see any noise. Now I'm going to move the antenna over next to the power pole. There it is. There's our noise. And as I back away from the pole, it goes away. One last thing to compare. I do have the chameleon whip set up out there right now. I don't have the doublet up, but I do have the little vertical. And I'll try to remember to take a picture of it to show you. Let's compare the Miniwhip to that. So this is the Miniwhip, the 20 meter band, and you can see some signals are in here. Some CW signals, some single sideband signals. They're a little faint, but they're there. Watch the waterfall. I'm going to switch the connectors here, and I'm going to switch over to the chameleon vertical out there in the ground. And as you can see, quite a big difference. The Miniwhip is not doing as well as a real antenna, but you know, that's okay. That's not what I want it for. I just want to do some simple browsing around. And we'll switch back, so keep an eye on the waterfall. This is the chameleon vertical. And this is the Miniwhip. So you can see the signals are way down. They're still there, but they're way down. So there's a comparison for you. It's not the most sensitive thing, but for a stealthy little out of the way, always available receive antenna, I think it'll work for what I want it for. So there you go. I think it's going to work out for me for what I want. Another use I have for it, by the way, is it's monsoon season here. Take a look at some of these weather images I've captured from the storms that are coming through every single day. It starts out okay in the mornings. I can hook up my doublet to maybe check into a net, but by later morning I'm unhooking it because the storms are moving in, and electrical storms out here are no joke. I shot some pictures of some lightning bolts the other night from one of the cells that was coming through, and boy, it was active. They were just striking all around us. And static electricity is amazing when those storms move past. Even if they're 4 or 5 miles away, I'll get a serious charge on the doublet. I actually got a shock off of it when I was unhooking it. And another time as I was walking past it, it was coiled up back on the support halfway to the mast. And there was a storm, electrical storm, about 4 or 5 miles away. And I could hear sizzling from the feed line on the doublet, like frying bacon in a pan. There was so much static in the air. So the other way the Miniwhip is useful for me right now is if I have the doublet unhooked, the storms aren't too close, and I want to do a little quick browse around on shortwave or do something, I can just flip the switch, turn it on, and listen for a while. And if the storms get too close, turn it off. It's not a big aerial up in the air. It's just a little thing sitting up there on the ladder. So I think it's going to work out great. My first big test with it will be coming up in September when I head back south, and I'll try it out down there in Quartzsite, where I've got less noise. As you saw, I'm sure I talked about the broadband over power line noise here in Kingman, and it's just ridiculous. And I'm really interested in poking around on VLF with the Miniwhip when I get down to Quartzsite, when I'm away from power lines and noise sources. So there'll probably be another video revisiting the Miniwhip once I get down there to Quartzsite, and then later down in Yuma, maybe even another one, who knows. So yeah, I think it's going to work out fine for me. So as a fixture on the RV, a little always available HF receive antenna, I think it's going to work out great. So there you go. Hope you found that interesting, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you're not already a subscriber, click to subscribe. Join us on the Facebook channel for discussion about the videos. And if you'd like to help support this channel, please click to support me on my Patreon page.